Hello and welcome to this week's live stream. Today we're going to focus on a new paradigm for spiritual leadership and embodied spiritual leadership as an expression of that new paradigm. And of course, your comments, your questions, and whatever comes up in the group to explore. I'm excited to connect with you. Grateful for the connection here. Yanya's already checking in. Wonderful to be back with you, Yanya, and with everyone here. For those of you that are participating in the live stream, you can comment on YouTube and also on Twitter, where I'll actually see your comments and I'll be able to respond to you verbally as we're moving through this time together in this virtual community circle. And if you're watching the replay, if you comment in YouTube, I will respond to you. I'll personally follow up with you there as well. And whether you're responding or following up or engaging through the live stream or the replay, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to connect in this way. Grateful for the opportunity to sit and explore what for me is a very important topic with our community here online. If you're not currently a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I invite you to click the link. There's one in the description wherever you're located. You can just click that link and that'll make you a subscriber. And of course, as always, if this topic and this video resonates with you, I invite you to give it a thumbs up. It makes a difference. Julie M. checking in. Blessings to you as well, Julie. Thanks for saying hi. Okay, before we do anything else, let's gather, shall we, formally in our circle. Let's just set it all aside energetically, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. And as you make your way into the circle on an energetic level, I invite you to close your eyes, begin breathing in and out through the nostrils with your palms to the sky. It's a wonderful receiving position. Who are you receiving from? You're receiving from the divine. You're opening up to an experience of the divine on a deeper level. And as always, please don't operate a motor vehicle or heavy equipment of any sort during this or any time we're together. You may not know it, but it's actually not safe to do so. You never know when you're going to fall out or drop out or go to sleep, as many people have reflected over the years when we share time together. Could be something that's being said, but even more likely, there's something going on at a much deeper level energetically. And when you're not multitasking, but especially not driving or operating heavy equipment, then you can just be present with what's unfolding and not put yourself or others at risk, or yourself or others in an unsafe dynamic. And with that, if you just find that place in the circle that resonates most for you, let's do a little bit of breathing as we open into meditating and divine connecting breath together. Deep breath in and hold. As you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before in this day, all the way out to the count of 8. And as you're letting that breath go, I just invite you to release everything that has been dominant in your thinking recently. Whatever it is, just release that with the breath, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since the start of the year, all the way out to the count of 8. And with that, releasing those emotions that have been dominant in your awareness of late, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since you were born, all the way out to the count of 8. And with that, I just invite you to release, to let go of the dominant way of being that has been expressing of late, all the way out to the count of 8. And another deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since the inception of your soul, all the way out to the count of 8. And with this, releasing the totality of all of you into the arms of the divine, into the divine mystery, the unknowable divine, all the way out to the count of 8. And as we open to some meditation together, in your mind's eye, still with your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky, if all of that is comfortable for you. Become aware of the cue of breath in front of your face. It serves you completely without any criteria or condition. You breathe it in, and another unit of breath joins the cue. Notice in the cue a color beginning to infuse itself. If you're assigning it with your imagination or in your mind, perhaps pick something that isn't normally present or expressed in any part of the body except perhaps your eyes. It could be a static color, fixed, or dynamic, changing. It's just there as an indicator, a way of illuminating or illustrating the path of the breath as it moves from the cue in front of your face through your body. And with the next breath that you breathe in, being with that breath from the perspective of the color in through the nostrils and then up towards the crown and then down into the lungs. Sitting in the lungs now as you continue breathing, perhaps even moving time forward very gently initially and then perhaps a little bit faster as you sit and are present with that color as it comes into the lungs, coats the interior lining of the lungs, and then migrates through that lining into the bloodstream and eventually into each and every cell in your body. There's a simple conclusion we can draw, and I just invite you to be aware of all the different ways that you might experience resonance or dissonance emotionally, intellectually, viscerally in the body, intuitively on all those levels, following this statement I'm about to make. The breath is becoming you, and you are becoming the breath. Be with whatever comes in response to that statement. The breath is becoming you, and you are becoming the breath. And then allow yourself to shift your perspective from inside the lungs to outside the body, and then maybe even backing off from the planet a little bit so that you can perceive the entire planet in your scope of vision. See the breath of the planet and see how the breath of the planet is serving you in the cue of breath in front of your face, and also then others with whom you share the space where you are now, your neighbors, your neighbors' neighbors, and so on and so forth, out into the community, the region, eventually perhaps even the continent or the hemisphere, and ultimately the entire planet. With each breath, you are connected directly by your breath to each and every person on the planet. And it's not just the people. Notice the breath of the planet is serving not just people, but also animals, insects, trees, dirt, rocks, water, fish, insects, everything. With each breath, you are connected to everyone and everything above, upon, and within the planet. And notice eventually the breath of the planet becomes the breath of the cosmos. For at the very edge of our atmosphere, that breath touches space and in turn, eventually every other part of space. And so we can say with each breath, you are connected to each and every one and thing throughout the entire cosmos, including that energy that underwrites all expressions. People, things, sentient and otherwise, the divine, a light that perhaps originates at a great distance in your perceptual view, but drawing closer with each breath that you breathe in, eventually close enough perhaps that you can become aware in whatever way of those twin frequencies that together express as that divine light. The frequency of the divine and the frequency of perfect health intertwine such that there is no separating one from the other. That light, be it a waveform or a particle, eventually connecting in, perhaps initially at your nostrils and then instantaneously throughout every level of your being, known and unknown, the invitation extended to each of these smallest aspects of you. Come return to your natural state of alignment and resonance. And with that, and you may even feel this in your body physically, or in other ways that you are aware, those artifacts of dissonance begin falling away. The natural expression of the aligned, resonant, divine expression that you are, and every level of your being naturally beginning to erupt. Those artifacts of dissonance appearing to gather at that universal drain. For whatever remains in separation, I invite you to remove the universal plug. All do the same. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine, and the river is flowing. Let's begin. As I shared in my earlier email, and if you're not currently on my email list and you'd like to be, you can sign up for free at kenwstone.com/newsletter. There's a link in the description below. Oh, and I want to make sure I acknowledge and say hi. Gary is checking in on a couple of different platforms. Gary, it's wonderful to be with you. Santosh is saying hi on Twitter. Wonderful to be with you as well. Anyone else who'd like to check in, it'd be wonderful to hear from you on the live stream and also on the replay on Twitter and on YouTube. In any case, in my email from earlier today, from my heart, I reflected on a new paradigm of spiritual leadership. And there was a reason this was coming forward for me this week. It came up in two different contexts over the last week. One was an email from a member of the community and another from a participant in the deep dive series. And if you saw the email, you saw that I referenced a couple of different things by way of sort of establishing a foundation for our exploration as a community, not just in writing, but also in our conversation today. I shared a little bit about embodied spiritual leadership and the four key characteristics of embodied spiritual leadership: authenticity, vulnerability, humility, and most importantly, vertical and horizontal embodiment. You can get these first three expressions in context from sort of a type 1 or a stage 1 leader or a stage 2 leader, but you don't get that third expression in a spiritual leader until there is a degree of vertical and horizontal embodiment, and then the expression of authenticity, of vulnerability, and humility shift fairly dramatically from an identification around, as we see in stage 1, the disempowered and unintegrated, or in stage 2, the empowered and unintegrated, or in stage 3, the whole, but still unintegrated. There's still some separation at play in stage 3, and then, of course, stage 4. I made reference to my interpretation of Plato's cave allegory and the 4 conditions that Plato explores there as the perfect setup for exploring those various stages of consciousness. Even going so far as to say that the prisoner in the first condition in stage 1 consciousness is really an expression of, let me say this differently. The chained prisoner is an artifact of the disempowered and separate or unintegrated self. But notice how the freed prisoner is still chained or bound to the obligation or to the perceptual view of separation, now empowered and separate or unintegrated. And so even though there's a tremendous and radical shift in that perceptual shift between stage 1 and stage 2, still confined in separation. This is meaningful for a couple of different reasons. From my perspective, in response to the 2 questions that were posed to me over the last week. One of them related to how do we talk about, or how should I go about sharing? This was a question from the individual in the deep dive retreat. How should I go about sharing these deeper truths, big T truths about the pandemic? Why do I feel called to do this? And so on. We had quite an exploration in the deep dive, and it's a topic that perhaps you're interested in exploring more about today. I'd love to address any particular questions that you have. But there, I promised in my email earlier that I would explore these 4 kind of key characteristics, and I also want to then put them in the context of Plato's cave allegory as we see these 4 different expressions of the various stages of consciousness. So we got prisoner, chained in the cave, can only see the shadows on the wall, is unaware of whether what the prisoner is hearing is the truth. And then, of course, there's the freed prisoner, but still, I'm suggesting, confined or bound to, chained effectively to the perceptual view of separation, empowered and unintegrated, still within the cave, can see the fire at the center of the cave is the source of the light. I see the truth, the person in stage 2, the freed prisoner, is saying. And they can also see the puppeteer, that is, those that are causing the shadows to be cast, the acting, the play acting going out that is creating these shadows on the wall. It's really a perfect setup for exploring this dynamic around the pandemic. The other question that was posed was a big question. I love big questions, and they also have a tendency to sort of push me in terms of what is integrated, what is in my awareness. And the big question in this case came from a member of the community who asked very specific questions. How are we to address or understand? And they named specific spiritual messengers. Here's this person who has done these things. Here's this organization. There's a movie that was just released on HBO in the last couple of weeks. This person was inquiring. This is a documentary movie about an organization that ostensibly on the surface was focused around really doing good in the world. But when the layers peel back, there was this very distorted expression going on within the organization and so on. And there were some other examples from the email as well, where this person was asking, how are we supposed to interpret this? What do we do with this? Why is this going on? How are we to understand when influencers are endorsing people, but then they subsequently go on to engage in distorted behavior? What does this say about our society? How do we shift our society? How do we get into these deeper levels, and so on? And I'm wading into that conversation as well with the From My Heart this week, is and trying to offer this perspective that I really feel is so clearly communicated in Plato's allegory. The third condition then, of course, is coming out of the cave. No longer are we confined within the framework of sort of the primary unintegrated dynamic of disempowerment and empowerment. Come out of the cave, come out into the light of the sun now. And Plato acknowledges in the allegory the very specific limitations and challenges associated with the leader who is now a stage 3 leader. And I've suggested in From My Heart and written and taught about this extensively over the last number of years. The stage 3 leader is now capable of being an embodied spiritual leader because of that element of embodiment, as I said at the beginning of our time together today. So now we have the potential for embodied spiritual leadership, but with that comes a particular challenge. The eyes have reset now out in the daylight and the sun. It's difficult to go back into the cave, difficult to have language that bridges the gap between the experience of out of the cave and in the cave. How do we talk to people who are in the cave, and so on? And then there's the fourth expression now in union with the sun, the true source of light, rather than this artificial expression of light, which in one expression or one experience in stage 2 can be said this way: I am the author of my life. See, there it is. I am the source of the fire. I am the one who is casting the shadows. So really, for many different reasons for me, a reason why the Plato's allegory is so compelling, if we think about this in terms of our modern dynamic and this developmental journey in consciousness. Okay, so what more could be said about authenticity or vulnerability or humility? There's an enormous amount that's been said about authenticity and vulnerability. And of course, the expressions of authenticity and vulnerability are very different. If we're primarily identified with this disempowered and unintegrated self, expressions of authenticity and vulnerability are radically different than if we're identified with empowered and unintegrated. And certainly, once again, very different than if we're exploring that from the perspective of whole and unintegrated in stage three. But I think we get somewhere if we start to look at expressions of humility. What is it to be express humility or to be humble in the context of stage three? And here is, for me, the perfect simple expression, an insight that came out of a exercise that I went through, I think for the first time in what was then called a part two course with the Art of Living Foundation. The exercise related to sitting down with another person and telling them how wonderful you are. And some people in the room have a challenge doing that, and some people in the room don't have a challenge doing that. But then there's a question. Okay, what are you doing? Are you praising the artist or the art? For example, if you're in an art museum and you're looking at a beautiful masterpiece, are you praising the art or the artist? And an awareness comes out. Of course, we're in the process of praising the artist. And who is that artist when it comes to each of us? And what a powerful insight then to realize we are praising the artist, the divine, the source of that expression that is coming through each one of us. That level or that expression of humility is, I think, is a unique expression of humility. That is to say, unique in the context of these first three stages of consciousness. We don't see that kind of expression of humility in stage one. We certainly don't see it in stage two, but we can begin seeing it in stage three. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick before I open up to conversation, comments, questions, etc., is just a little note around the question of vertical and horizontal embodiment. What I mean by vertical embodiment is that interior dynamic of coming into contact with and integrating and embodying ultimately the totality of divine presence, which we could say in its simplest expression or in a more simple expression is a function of soul embodiment. But how we go about encountering and experiencing that integration is completely unique to each of us as human beings. And the degree to which we're integrated, of course, I mean, what a fascinating point of exploration. In the same way, horizontal embodiment relates to the conscious awareness of one's individual or private experience or relationship with divinity, now in the context of relationship with others. And this is where I think the second question becomes so rich and challenging, right? It's not about trying to dismiss or excuse or rationalize any distorted behavior at all on anyone's part. It's about trying, from my perspective, I have no interest in trying to do that or justify it or whatever, or dismiss it either. It's, for me, it's about a recognition that as spiritual messengers, as we're moving through this process alone, if not for other reasons, and of course there are plenty of other reasons, are surfacing those things that are as yet unintegrated. And so we can resist that all we want, right? I shared in my From My Heart, you know, I received a commandment level directive. That's how I interpreted it. God saying, you're going to do this, and this is how this is going to happen. That commandment pushed a lot of buttons and has continued to push a lot of buttons as I followed through on that. What I mean by that is it is surfacing those aspects of my unintegrated self for attention, for presence, to be transmuted, to be ultimately integrated. And I'm sure as you have experience in your own life, it's not just in the quiet moments of inner prayer or meditation or reflection or journaling that things are surfaced, but all the more so in intimate relationships with family members, with romantic partner, in business context, and so on and so forth, in intimacy with the divine, where things really begin to surface. And there's no reason to think that that wouldn't continue. And in fact, it very much does in that dynamic of stepping in as spiritual messengers. Okay, so let me see if I can summarize and then be quiet and just open up for the conversation that may be opening for us to share together or to just drop into transmission and be with the raw feed. There's a deeper level of reality, right? And the cave allegory, I think, is much more instructive and compelling than the imagery that I've tended to use here on my YouTube channel, but also in a lot of the teaching that I've done, where I'm talking about levels of the ocean. It's confusing, I think, and I'm just trying to point out my own limitations and the limitations of the language I've used and the imagery that I have a tendency to see when I close my eyes. It's confusing how, I mean, I think on one level we sort of get it, right? There could be a storm in the ocean at the level of the first tier, the first level of consciousness, stage one of the disempowered and unintegrated. And it could be calmer in at that second tier where we have empowered and separate. But I think the thing that's confusing about this is what relationship exists between these two. Well, of course, from the perspective of the disempowered, it's all about trying to address or resolve the storm. But see, here's how I think Plato's cave allegory is absolutely brilliant. We're not dealing with a storm. The prisoner is chained. They're stuck looking at the wall. They're stuck seeing shadows. They're not actually seeing the direct cause itself. They're just seeing effects, not the source, right? And then we've got the freed prisoner who's saying, aha, I see the source. It is the fire. Or in the language that to me resonates, they're saying, let me say that differently. I don't know that it necessarily resonates with me, but it resonates in terms of how stage two is taught most often, at least that I'm aware of right now in the world. I am the author of my life. I am the source of the light, which paradoxically is pointing to a much deeper truth that I think Plato is pointing out, which also then means I am the source of the shadow, right? I am the fire in the center of the cave and the puppeteer and the marionette that is casting that shadow. I am the source of the voice of the truth that exists in this cave of separation. And then notice in Plato's cave allegory, there's coming out of the cave. It's an entirely different dynamic, much easier to recognize the power of that shift than it is when we're talking about levels of the ocean. If you haven't been deep into the ocean, and I guess I haven't ever been that deep except in consciousness, but it's at that level that I imagine. I think this is probably true, but it's only in my imagining. I've never had the direct experience of being in a submarine or in some sort of diving device that would allow me to go that deep to have this experience. But at some level, the ocean is calm. There is a peace that is whose origin comes exclusively from within. This is where I think it's both compelling and confusing to use the ocean as the framework for the conversation, right? If we think about the cave allegory, I'm either in the cave, I'm in separation, or I'm out of the cave, I'm not in separation anymore, or at least I'm stepping towards wholeness. And then in the fourth condition, in the cave allegory, we're having an experience of union with the sun, one with the source of light, wherein all perspectives are enlivened, and it's possible for a messenger in stage four to speak one set of words in parable or allegory that resonate in each stage of consciousness. The limitations of the stage three leader, spiritual leader, are gone because there's that deeper level of integration. All right, well, how does this play out practically speaking? From my perspective, this is everything. It's not just a question of leading others. It's a question of leading ourselves. It's a question of what is embodied, what is showing up, and being able to interpret that or understand that in the context of this roadmap, which for me is so compelling. But here's the thing about me. I have no interest in trying to impose what I perceive as the importance on you. My presumption is, since we're hanging out and sharing some time together, there must be some level of resonance to what I'm talking about. And so, which is great, right? Then we're able to move forward and have a conversation, an exploration about the why or the what of it. That's much more interesting than establishing why this perceptual view is so important. I'm not really that committed to this perceptual view, except in this sense. From my perspective, if we're trying to have a conversation about what is really real, stuff inside the cave or stuff outside the cave, if we've already made it outside the cave, or if we're in the process of leaving the cave, moving from 2 to 3, we're having a completely different conversation than we are if we're inside the cave. And in both cases, the thing I was trying to point out to the people that were asking these questions is that the answer to that question, which perspective is most important to us? What is our goal in sharing the truth with others? If we're in a dynamic of trying to rescue or save, we're in the cave operating in separation. Whereas if we're out of the cave, perhaps there's no communication about what's going on in the cave, but communication about what else is possible. Anyway, I'm caught up in something that is compelling and engaging for me. I presume it is since you're here watching, but I really want to focus on your questions and comments, which there's nothing coming in. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and see, is there any part of this that you would like to explore on a deeper level? If there are any questions that are coming up, any comments, anything you'd like to share, I certainly would love to open up to that before we drop in to some transmission and then wrap up our time together for this week. So I'll just sit for a moment as we sit together in deep gratitude. One thing I will tell you, I'll do a little commercial here for subscribing to the channel. If you haven't yet subscribed and you're interested in exploring more, I really invite you. There's a logo. Where is it? Which it's here. It's here. It's down here in the corner. If you click that on YouTube, it'll pop up and give you an opportunity to become a subscriber. And if you click the bell, you'll be notified anytime I go live or post a video. More often than not, I've just been posting or doing live streams, but I used to do a lot of video that wasn't part of a live stream. Maybe that'll start happening again. I don't know. We'll see where I'm led. And you can also click a link at the end of the description below. There's just a short description about this particular video, and then there's a little bit.ly link. If you click that, it does the same thing. It will make you a subscriber. It's helpful on a couple of different levels. It gives us a chance to stay connected in a different way. And it also supports the YouTube algorithm, which helps kind of get this information out to other people who might be interested as well. And for that, I'd be grateful. And the other thing is that if this content is compelling to you and you'd like to share it with others, one way to do that is just to give it a thumbs up. And when you do that, again, that supports the algorithm. Okay, I don't see any comments coming in. Maybe we're all stunned with the brilliance of my insights into embodied spiritual leadership, or perhaps it's just muddled and not clear. Either way, I think we're going to come to an even deeper, direct level of an experience that supersedes any kind of knowledge or even feeling around this. A direct encounter with the embodied divine, through which all of these things come into form, right? Plato's cave allegory is an allegory that, from my perspective, is trying to describe or attempting to point to these different fundamental conditions that exist in consciousness. It's been interpreted in other ways as well. In fact, I'm not actually aware of anyone who's interpreted it the way I have. I'm not trying to be different, it's just how I see it. And again, whether the cave allegory makes sense or the levels of the ocean, or we're just talking raw consciousness, I'm grateful for the opportunity to explore and most appreciative for the chance to sink into some silence here. Oh, we do have a few comments coming up. Julie says, it's as if you tapped into my prayer this week. I'm stepping in and out of the cave lately. It's like hokey pokey. I love it. I love it. Uh, I love it. This is so, so, yeah. I'd love to talk more about that if that's something you'd like to explore, Julie. In the meantime, congratulations. Hokey pokey in and out of the cave. I resemble that remark. Annie wants to know, what if your intuition, gut feeling leads you in a different direction than others around you? I don't think that that's really, let me say this. It's not really a concern in my inner process. I'm not trying to relate my guidance to what resonates with other people. In fact, just totally transparently, Annie, the thing I will tell you is that just about every step in my journey as a spiritual messenger, I've been given the opportunity of the invitation to flat out ignore what other people are advising and guiding me to do. So, for example, when I started having an awareness of soul embodiment, I remember a good friend of mine said to me, we were having tea together, and she said, I don't think you want to be known for that. That doesn't make any sense. It's not clear. It's not an effective way of communicating. You need to find a different way to communicate that. And I never have. And I didn't let that worry me or affect my awareness that was coming in. I just followed with the same person said to me after I was so excited about the beneath the sand cosmology. She said, look, you don't want to be this isn't what everyone else is saying. This doesn't fit with what other people are saying. It doesn't make sense. You don't want to be known for that. And I thought, it doesn't really matter what I want to be known for. This is what's coming in to my raw awareness. The one thing I will say, Annie, is if you look at embodied spiritual leadership, authenticity exists in all stages of consciousness. Vulnerability exists in all stages of consciousness. And humility, more or less, exists in all stages of consciousness. But what doesn't exist is embodiment. Stage one is a radically disembodied dynamic, primarily identified with thinking. So if what is showing up in awareness is built around a dynamic of fear or safety, no matter how strong the guidance is around it, that guidance is being consumed or filtered through the lens of stage one. That is not integrated guidance. Doesn't matter whether it fits with what other people say or not. It's not integrated guidance. And you can follow that guidance, but that guidance is not pointing towards true north. It's pointing towards separate north. Let me see if I can illustrate this more strongly or more clearly. So here we are chained to the wall of the cave, looking at the shadows on the wall of the cave. All the intuition that we're having in that awareness dynamic is built around an illusory dynamic entirely, right? Everything that is identified in separation, especially if it relates to disempowerment or safety or fear. If we shift into stage two, we're freed now in the cave, right? That guidance has a tendency to be very identified in control or in the heart, in the head and the heart. And in that dynamic, the focus has changed. Sometimes it's an expression of fear, but more often than not, it's an expression of greed or acquisition. And so sometimes acquisition is sort of the antithesis of what one was afraid of. So I'm motivated now to avoid some thing that previously was the dominant challenge that I was experiencing in stage one. So I'm pushing away from that. It's an avoidance dynamic, or I'm moving towards something from an acquisition or a greed or there's a more refined way of saying this, but the word is escaping me right now, and I don't want to get hung up on it. Now, if we're in an integrated dynamic, then what is happening is guidance is no longer related specifically to stage one challenges or stage two challenges. It's opening into a dynamic of that deeper experience, that is the outside the cave experience, which is entirely unknown and effectively unknowable. So that's the one sort of checkpoint that I would encourage an awareness and an exploration of in conjunction with guidance. Our intuitive guidance systems all can be distorted by our own attachments. And these could be attachments for things that we want to acquire or things that we're afraid of. And so it's essential that we have a process for removing that distraction before zeroing in on guidance per se. I hope that's helpful, Annie. I appreciate the question. Um, let me see. Okay, we've got a now we're cooking with gas. We've got a conversation. Let me see what Julie's saying. So I'm realizing that what recent events is triggering in me is an underlying illusion of powerlessness. How do we resolve or heal this? Yeah, this is happening for a lot of people right now, Julie. And the issue is the resolution. Think about it in terms of chained up, free in the cave, or outside the cave. Just these three conditions. Oops, three, not three. This would be three. So in these three conditions, right? The how do we resolve or heal? The answer from the perspective of the powerlessness is we chase an illusory dynamic. But the actual resolution can only be found outside the cave, right? Or let's actually put language to it. So in a powerless dynamic, there is something that has more power, right, over me. So the question would be, how do I secure power? Well, the answer to that would be to go to stage 2, but I'm still in the cave in stage 2. So what is the actual resolution to that? Would be to integrate that, to integrate the empowered perspective, and to be able to come into a surrender dynamic around this. Now, this doesn't just happen like this, right? We don't have an experience of powerlessness and go, snap, snap, now I'm empowered, snap, snap, now I've surrendered. If only it were that easy, right? So the integration process would be about feeling, about being able to explore fully the limits of that powerlessness, and then the limits of ultimate power, and then opening naturally into an experience and a recognition that in there is an integrated and powerless dynamic. There's an integrated and empowered dynamic. But even more, when we surrender to the divine, we set aside the idea that there is something to fix, right? We open to a completely different perspective. It's no longer healing, directed healing, right? That is to say, I need to work on or fix this problem. It's more about opening up to the innate wholeness that expresses in, through, and as each of us. And this isn't, I'm giving you an intellectual idea here, but it's not an intellectual exercise. It's a visceral practice. It is truly letting go of control, not in just in word or in deed or in mindset. It's in the totality, not just of thinking, feeling, but also in being. So opening up to the recognition that underneath everything else is the divine, and not just the recognition of that or the feeling of it, I'm pointing at my chest, but also the being experience of that. And that integration journey is very, very different than trying to move from disempowerment to empowerment. Very different. It's an integration of these experiences rather than a mastery of them, if this is making sense, Julie. Okay, Yanya says, I don't think I can post, but I see your post, so it must be working now. And Gary says, I love who you are and what you bring through with us. Thank you so much for being you and not changing for anyone. Can't help myself, and thanks for the acknowledgement and the recognition, Gary. Grateful to be here with you. Yanya says, I'm not clear about the prisoner who is outside the cave and seeing sunlight. They're not a prisoner anymore. They have set themselves free of being a chained prisoner, which is the first condition in the allegory, or the second conditioner, the second condition, freed within the context of the cave. They've now set themselves free of the cave in the third condition. That is, in the allegory, they have surrendered. They have opened up to divinity. They have left the cave of empowerment and disempowerment and separation and stepped out into the light. So they are not a prisoner anymore of separation. They are opening up to their wholeness. In the stages of consciousness, that movement out of the cave is commensurate with the process of surrender and letting go of control. Let me see. Yanya says, but if being outside is stage 3, which is still in separation, then there's more. How can he also be in the sunlight, which is actually in stage 4? Being in the sunlight and being the sun are the differences between 3 and 4 in the cave allegory. That's the difference. So being in the sun, being in the true light, that is to say, surrendering to the divine, opening up to divine will and so on, that's moving out into the sunlight. In 4, in union, that is one with the sun. Let me see what this is. More than 2 lines doesn't seem to be posted. They're all posted. I think I see them all, Yanya. Thank you so much for the questions. I hope that I'm answering your questions in a way that makes sense. I'm more than happy to dive in at a deeper level if there's anything else. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay when comments are coming in. So the thing I want to say again is, if we look at the allegory as a way of understanding, if we think about stages of consciousness as a way of understanding, recognizing the limits of understanding, our desire to understand ultimately is an expression of the separate self, truly. So one way to say this is that all guidance sought is sought from a perspective of separation, and therefore contains within it some distortion, the distortion of the illusion of separation. True north is an experience of absolute resonance. It would actually be moving outside the context of guidance per se into an experience of flow with the divine. That would be a level of refinement that's very difficult to articulate succinctly. At least it's difficult for me to do so. Okay. Annie says, thank you. Yes, more food for thought and expanding awareness. Beautiful. Yeah, the thing, Annie, and I just say this to everyone, the thing about embodied spiritual leadership, or let me just say it in a different way, right? Whether we want to call it embodied spiritual leadership or something else, the name of it doesn't matter so much. The question is, what is that an expression of? It is, from my perspective, an expression and experience of the integration of who we are for ourselves and in context in relationship with others. And this is not to try to presume that there is some, stripes on your shoulder or stars on your helmet or whatever that says, now you have arrived. Now you are a certified blah, blah, blah. You're certified with embodied spiritual leadership. You're an embodied messenger. And this is, I think, where we run into challenges with that second question. I mean, the second question tried to address this, or probably did address it very powerfully, that was posed to me. What are we supposed to do with these messengers who have these profound spiritual gifts, but then get engaged in distorted behavior? How are we supposed to understand that? And the suggestion that I'm trying to make, although it may not be very clear, but let me try to be clear about it now, is that those distortions are a function of those things that are as yet not integrated. And without wanting to dismiss that or minimize that at all, but also to recognize there is a universal dynamic going on around that, right? The universal dynamic is we all have aspects that are not yet fully integrated, or let's say just about all of us. Maybe there are some of us on the planet, and I would not put myself in this category, who are fully integrated. To be clear, I'm not putting myself in that category. But maybe there are some people who would claim that, and where it's actually true. But for them, I think there's probably a very, very different expression that's going on. That's another thing I'm trying to identify with this. A stage 1 leader is talking and teaching around fear and safety. A stage 2 leader is talking around manifesting dreams. Here's how to make your life the way you want it to be, still in the cave. A stage 3 leader is saying, hey, outside here in the sun, with God, with divinity, with source, whatever language you want to put on that. In this context, right, we have an experience of divinity as every expression of us, as disempowered, as empowered. And through the integration of those, we can come out of the cave into the light of the sun. And in 4, and I don't even want to try to attempt the transmission in 4, because as I say, I am not in an embodied and fully integrated experience of four. I have limited experiences of four from time to time, but I certainly couldn't claim to be there 100% or even close to 100% of the time. But that verbal transmission would come across as a parable, an allegory, a metaphor in that framework. It could never be literally spoken of. And further, it would resonate at every stage of consciousness. One set of words would resonate with meaning for each stage of consciousness. That is to say, inside and outside of the cave, but only in four when we are one with the sun, one with the divine. Only there. And I've had people say to me before, well, I'm going to have to really think about how to communicate in four. You don't have to think about it. It happens naturally. When it is embodied, you can't help yourself but speak and communicate this way. It's not something that has to be crafted. It just is part of the transmission. It's a function of embodiment. That's the key, is embodiment. Embodied spiritual leadership is all about embodiment. Okay. I don't see any other comments coming in. Really appreciate everyone who has checked in during the live stream to say hi. Look forward to reading comments from everyone else who's looking at the replay or anyone who's in the live stream and just still processing things and sort of chewing on them. Would love to see your comments below as well. Grateful for the chance to connect in this way. Let's take a deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, just setting it all aside, everything we've talked about, everything we've explored, whatever new understanding or new confusion has come in from the words that I've used, let's set all of that aside and just open up to a more embodied experience of divinity. 7, 6, 5, 4. Beautiful. 3, 2. Beautiful. 1. Here, as we embody, as we resonate, it is the resonance of divine presence. It has a completely different resonance. As embodied messengers, that resonance doesn't even require language. It just is. Hmm. It, it moves like waves of, I don't even know what. It's like a current that just, like, I feel it through my entire being. My hands and feet buzz, and I feel this resonance through my entire being. And as I'm sitting with the group, I feel that I'm having an experience of what is going on in the collective of the group. Now, your particular experience of that may be very different, right? You may not feel anything. You might have an experience of some dissonance coming up. I mean, people have all these different experiences. It's one of the reasons why I think it's so compelling to open into embodied spiritual leadership. It doesn't presume what the message is, it doesn't presume what that true north is. I mean, we have all these different religious traditions on our beautiful planet, all these expressions of different forms of intimacy with the divine. We have spirituality outside of the structure of a religious tradition in many different flavors. God whispers in each ear, and we all hear something different, maybe radically different. It's part of the beauty of our integration experience. If we were all fully integrated vertically and horizontally right now, would we all hear the divine saying the same thing? I don't think so. I think there would be this beautiful diversity in the experience of embodied resonance. We wouldn't be wrestling with the dynamics of the cave. We would be celebrating the experience and the resonance of being out of the cave, of being in the true light of divine presence. There wouldn't be an argument about this is more right or more true, because that is all framed from the perspective of the cave. We would be celebrating the diversity of the experience of divine resonance and that expression of divine presence in each and every human being. Would be a very, very different experience, but it wouldn't be a homogenous dynamic. I don't think. I could be wrong. I've sat with embodied messengers who have profound insights from the perspective of a variety of different traditions. I've sat with an embodied messenger who had profound insights from any tradition that you might want to pull perspective from. A diversity of expression and experience enriches us. Just like we look at nature, we don't see one type of tree or one type of insect or animal or one type of fish, one type of bird. There are all these different expressions, all of them beautiful in their own way, just as you are. I'm going to begin stepping back now. Invite you to return the universal plug. I'll do the same as I begin bringing this transmission to a close. It's such an honor to sit with you, to resonate, to be. It's fun to kick ideas around and teach and hopefully open up a new perspective. The thing that most interests me or energizes me isn't that you would see the world the way I see it, but that the way that I see it, or the way the divine expresses through me and communicates through me, that open up a deeper level of intimacy for you with the divine in whatever way that is most meaningful for you. That your journey and your expression as an embodied messenger be supported by that, and that whatever message is coming through you begin to blossom the experience and expression of your gifts, your being presence, and so on and so forth. That embodied spiritual leadership continue to express in the diversity of consciousness and presence in the same way that we see that glorious diversity expressed in nature all around our beautiful planet. Plug in all the way, transmission to a close now. I'm so grateful for the chance to be with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit here today. Please do comment if there are any questions coming up, anything you'd like to reflect on, give voice to. If there's a question you'd like to ask and it needs to take place in email, by all means, send that in. I love the explorations that we have together. Can't wait to be again with you very, very soon. For now, peace and much love. Bye for now. Have a beautiful, beautiful week as I try to find there's my mouse. I can figure out how to close the transmission now. Have a wonderful week. Bye for now. Peace.